Here we are.
Her mother went so far as to insist.
That's great, I don't care.
$5,000 a week for life, but you can't talk to one of your parents for 15 years. Would you do it?
Yes, absolutely, without hesitation. $5,000 a week for the rest of my life? You understand, that's $260,000 a year in perpetuity. All right? It'd be fiscally...
Yeah, no. It wouldn't be hard, because one of mine's already gone. So, Lovecraft, let's see, Apocalypse. Maybe we should read some fan fiction. The Haunted Holiday Inn. Let's go with that one tonight.
At Explore, we've upgraded our network to bring better, faster internet to rural and small areas.
Let's finish you up tonight. After we get that done.
Connections are excellent everywhere.
Join the hundreds of thousands enjoying fast, reliable internet from Explore. Better network, better connections.
The Haunted Holiday Inn. Welcome to Mystery Crackers. I'm Michael, your host for tonight's Miss Marple Mystery. It's always
loading. We're using triple thick around the eyes to give it that extra glossy
It's a pleasure
glow.
to have you here. Before we begin, I'd love to know what's something you've always been curious about. A small habit people have, a place you've never been, or even a mystery that stayed with you for years. Share it with us in the comments. I truly enjoy reading your thoughts. Now then, settle in, and let's begin tonight's story. Chapter 1. The morning mist curled gently along the hedgerows of Netherlinch, a sleepy village tucked into the Wiltshire countryside, where time moved as slowly as cream in a teacup. A fine Monday in late September had brought an unexpected flurry of activity to the otherwise uneventful lanes. The once abandoned coaching inn on the edge of the village, the Old Hart's Hollow, had recently reopened under the glossy, if peculiar name, the Holiday Inn at Netherlinch. A London firm had bought and refurbished the sprawling Tudor building, promising rural charm with modern amenities, though villagers found the electric lamps unsettling and the espresso machine entirely unnecessary. Miss Jane Marple, staying with her cousin the widow Lambert for a brief countryside respite, had insisted on joining her hostess for breakfast at the newly reopened inn. I do believe she had said, adjusting her dove-grey gloves, that one can tell rather a lot about a place and its people by watching how they serve tea. The dining room, once a stable, had been tastefully converted with rustic windows overhead, polished pine floors that still carried a faint scent of linseed oil. A long window overlooked a damp garden where an old stone well stood unused, cloaked in moss. The inn had only 6 guests that morning, and Miss Marple observed each one with polite disinterest, or so it seemed. There was Mr. Felix Stroud, a lean man with sharp elbows and a perpetually raised eyebrow, sitting alone, barely touching his eggs. Next to him, a woman in expensive but badly coordinated clothing nibbled at a croissant with fingers weighed down by rings. Her name was Mrs. Vanessa Harcourt, and she had arrived the evening before in a flurry of complaints about luggage, air quality, and their outdated decor. At the central table, Colonel Ambrose Fielder, retired and puffing slightly from the short walk down the stairs, held court with Miss Cynthia Bell, a cheerful young woman with a fondness for bright scarves and nervous laughter. They appeared to be the only two genuinely enjoying themselves. Then there was Reverend Martin Ely, whose collar had been slightly askew since the moment he'd arrived, who sat contemplatively by the fireplace with a notebook and a bowl of porridge. Miss Marple noticed he glanced more often at the staircase than his meal. The innkeeper, Mrs. Agnes Whitlow, a woman of practical shoes and stiff curls, was busy, ushering in fresh toast and reminding the guests that the garden terrace was strictly off-limits due to some unsafe paving. Said it twice, which Miss Marple found suggestive. "Quite the collection," murmured Cousin Lambert, pouring out a second cup of tea. "I say, Jane, don't stare so." Miss Marple smiled faintly and stirred her tea. "I'm not staring, dear, merely observing. One never knows when an idle comment may prove useful."
I still need a
Useful
video.
for what? Goodness, I do
Alright,
believe
what
you
else am I
think there's a
working on?
mystery afoot. There usually is,
Alright,
said
someone
Miss
needs to lose
Marple,
a head.
where there are human beings and good tea. Suddenly, a scream rang out, a sharp, startled cry that cut through the clink of cutlery and chatter. All heads turned toward the upper floor landing, where the housemaid, barely 20 and white as her apron, stood clutching the rail. It's Mrs. Harcourt," she gasped. "She's collapsed in her room. She's dead." A silence fell, heavy and immediate. Colonel Fielding was the first to act, hurrying up the stairs with surprising agility for a man of his years. Reverend Ely followed, gesturing for someone to fetch help. Mr. Stroud folded his paper and rose, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple remained seated, her gaze not on the staircase, but on the abandoned table where Mrs. Harcourt's untouched croissant now lay. A glimmer of interest lit her blue eyes as she leaned forward and gently touched the edge of the empty teacup. "I wonder," she said softly, "who brought her that tea?" An hour later, a constable from nearby Market Wexley had arrived, along with a local doctor, Dr. Rupert Carville, a dignified man with horn-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually pinched expression. "She's dead all right," he declared. "No sign of violence. Could have been a heart attack or a seizure. We'll know more when the coroner has a look." Mrs. Whitlow fluttered behind him. She said she felt a bit faint last night, but insisted it was nothing serious. Just the travel, she said. "Did she have any known conditions?" asked the constable. "No, nothing, she told me. But she was very particular about her tea. Always asked for a slice of lemon, never milk. And she took a certain powdered supplement for digestion. Always had it mixed in." Miss Marple, who had quietly entered the room with the others, stepped closer to the windowsill, where a faint ring of moisture had been left by a removed cup. "And who brought her tea this morning?" she asked softly. "That would have been Sarah, the new girl,"
Not quite
said
the right
Mrs. Whitlow,
size.
fretting with her apron. "She was helping in the kitchen and did the rounds with the trays." "Did she prepare?" No. The tray was already set by me. I brought it up from the kitchen. Sarah just delivered it. She barely spoke a word." Miss Marple nodded. "And who else was awake at that time?" "Well," Mrs. Whitlow hesitated. "Colonel Fielding was out walking early, before breakfast. Reverend Ely was in the lounge reading. Miss Bell, well, she hadn't come down yet. Mr. Stroud was in the garden, he said. No one would have had any reason to go upstairs." "Except," murmured Miss Marple, "someone clearly did." As the inn returned to a semblance of order, the guests retreated to their rooms or gathered in stiff clusters, whispering in corners. Miss Marple, seated once more in the dining room, sipped her now cold tea. Cousin Lambert leaned in. Jane, you've got that look. You don't think it was natural causes? No, said Miss Marple quietly. Not at all. But why? There's nothing to suggest. Exactly, Miss Marple cut in, her voice calm. There's nothing. No history, no warning, no complaint. Healthy women don't simply collapse. And more importantly, she paused. Yes, she was afraid. Afraid? Miss Marple set her cup down. When a woman wears all her jewelry to breakfast, dear, it isn't vanity, it's protection. Chapter 2. The grey clouds had thickened by mid-morning, casting long shadows across the flagstone path outside the inn. Inside, the once cheerful sitting room had become a place of hushed tones and quick glances. Guests wandered aimlessly, pretending to read newspapers or sip tea, while their eyes flicked toward the staircase where Mrs. Harcourt had last been seen alive. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed armchair by the fireplace, crocheting calmly, her blue wool looping steadily between her fingers. Yet her eyes missed nothing. Cousin Lambert returned from a quiet word with the constable. The poor dear is still in her room, she whispered, settling beside her. Dr. Carville says the body mustn't be moved until the coroner arrives. You'd think it was a murder inquiry. Miss Marple's needle paused ever so slightly. One hopes it will be treated as such, if only briefly. Lambert frowned. You're serious, aren't you? You truly think she didn't just collapse? She didn't look like the collapsing kind, Miss Marple replied. Too tense, too prepared. Before Lambert could question further, the sitting room door opened and Mr. Felix Stroud entered, his trench coat dusted with rain, despite no one recalling him leaving. Chilly out there, he muttered, heading toward the tea tray. Strange morning, isn't it? Colonel Fielding, who had been half dozing with a newspaper folded over his lap, sat up straighter. Strange, yes, but not altogether unexpected. That woman was wound tight as a coiled spring. Really, Colonel? Miss Bell scolded softly from the corner, where she'd been arranging a bowl of dahlias. It's unkind to speak ill of her. She was only here a day. Stroud sipped his tea. Long enough to make an impression. She acted as if the walls were whispering secrets. Miss Marple looked up. Did she, Mr. Stroud? He glanced at her, mildly surprised. Well, yes. Caught her pacing the hallway outside my room last night. Said she was sleepwalking. Didn't seem quite the sleepwalking type, if you ask me. Fell quiet again, until Miss Bell set the vase down with a clink. I heard her shouting in the night. Around 1, I think. I assumed she was dreaming. Miss Marple folded her crochet work, and yet no one asked how she slept this morning. Stroud frowned. She didn't come down to breakfast at all. No, Miss Marple said gently. She did, briefly, long enough to request lemon in her tea. Colonel Fielding cleared his throat. Do you believe someone poisoned it? I believe, Miss Marple replied softly, that we are all pretending not to notice how frightened she was. And fear is very rarely without cause. Later that afternoon,
Hello? Just working on a couple of projects. What you doing? I didn't see any of it falling. I just went outside and there were puddles. It was lovely.
Yeah,
That's good.
anyway, you're working more, right?
I'm working tomorrow, then I have Tuesday off, and then I work Wednesday. And then Thursday, I get one day of work, working on stuff, and then Friday I head to the city, and I'm back Sunday.
Okay, just checking. Yeah, the kids still had 3 weeks old.
Seems like they've been there forever.
See?
Yes. Do you think she's gonna be fluffy enough?
What are you gonna get? Oh, I don't know. I don't care if it's fluffy. I just don't want you to be sneezing.
Well, we'll find out when we get her. We'll give her a couple of weeks. If not, we'll figure something out.
Maybe we should get rid of her now.
You want a kitten, Mama?
No, 'cause I'm telling you, I don't want you to have to suffer.
Well, I've suffered my whole life.
All right, suck it up then, okay.
Worst comes to worst, I'll just buy more Kleenexes.
Oh. Okay, that'll be all right.
All right.
Oh, yeah,
Hmm?
pick up some white paint. Just thinking, I thought I had some.
Cauliflower in the air fryer is very good.
Okay, I didn't look in the fridge. I haven't seen it the way it is, just for a drive.
Okie dokie, Mommy yummy.
He said he wasn't in no hurry.
No.
I was, but anyway, that's all right. We made it.
Yep.
Okay, talk to you all. Night, love you.
Good night, love you too. That was my mommy.
Constable returned to speak to the guests individually. Miss Marple, having given her observations to him earlier, chose instead to wander through the lounge and out into the garden. The unsafe paving didn't appear particularly dangerous, merely uneven. A few fallen leaves lay scattered across the flagstones. At the far end of the garden, a small wooden bench overlooked the old well. She sat, adjusting her shawl, and let her eyes travel across the grounds. The vines creeping up the western wall were old, untouched during the renovations. Moss grew thickly in the crevices between bricks. There was something heavy about the place, not malevolent, but watchful. Footsteps crunched lightly behind her. "Unusual view," came Reverend Ely's voice. "Rather restful," Miss Marple said without turning. "Except for the well. Wells always seem to have secrets, don't you think?" He gave a light chuckle. "Symbolic, perhaps. A deep place.
A little bit
Hard
bigger
to
would have been
know
good, but
what
we're working
lies
with what we
at the
got.
bottom." She turned to look at him. "You seem thoughtful today, Reverend." "I suppose I am," he admitted. "I spoke with Mrs. Harcourt yesterday afternoon. She came to the lounge while I was working on my sermon. Asked if I believed in ghosts." Miss Marple tilted her head. "And do you?" "Not in the clanking chains and moaning variety, but perhaps in the sense that the past never truly leaves us." She mentioned anything in particular? Eli hesitated. Only that she'd stayed here many years ago, when it was still the Heart's Hollow Inn. Said she'd come with her sister during the war. I believe her exact words were, "Some things shouldn't have been brought back to life." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him. "Curious phrasing, that." "Yes." He adjusted his collar, though she said it with a half laugh. "I thought she was being dramatic." "Some women are," Miss Marple agreed, "and others only pretend to be." By evening, the coroner had arrived and removed the body. The constable spoke to the guests again, this time more briskly. "It looks," he said, "as though we found traces of digitalis in her teacup, though we'll wait for full confirmation. It's a powerful substance. Too much can stop the heart." Cynthia Bell paled visibly. "Digitalis? But that's plant poison, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded. "Foxglove, most often. Quite common in English gardens." "I have some in mine," said Colonel Fielding grimly. "But I doubt anyone's raiding my flower beds for a murder." "Let's hope not," murmured Miss Marple. After supper, the atmosphere in the inn had shifted from unsettled to cagey. Guests kept to themselves, retreating early or locking their doors. Even Mrs. Whitlow seemed less certain in her footsteps. Miss Marple lingered in the reading room. paging through a local guidebook printed by the inn's owners. She stopped at a passage that described the well in the garden, once believed to have been sealed in 1928 after a fatal accident. A young maid had drowned, though the details were vague. She tapped the page thoughtfully, then looked toward the shuttered windows. The past inevitably leaves us. And if Mrs. Harcourt had been here before, years ago, who else knew? Who else remembered? And who wanted her silenced? Chapter 3.
You've got a million things to do. But right now, you're feeling crafty. Because
Yes, I am.
you'll be moving out of this place.
Oh, not that kind of crafty.
There's no moving on from this friendship.
Morning arrived with a heavy drizzle that clung to the inn's old leaded windows and muted the sounds of clinking cups.
Hi guys,
in the
thanks for the
breakfast
thumbs
room.
up before you head out. Always
The
appreciated.
usual cheerful atmosphere had vanished, replaced by strained politeness and overfilled silences.
Alright, I got one on the
Miss
stairs.
Marple
See how many I
sipped
can
tea
get in
slowly,
before
her gaze
10
drifting
o'clock.
across the few remaining guests. Several had left hastily after the previous evening's announcement of digitalis poisoning. Fear always scattered people quicker than facts. Mr. Stroud remained, impeccably dressed, his eyes sharper than his posture suggested. Miss Bell, flustered and distracted, stirred sugar into her coffee without taking a sip. Colonel Fielding, whose military bearing had become more rigid overnight, read the paper with exaggerated calm. Reverend Ely, as ever, remained in quiet observation, his fingers folded loosely over the spine of a worn book. Mrs. Whitlow hovered by the door, her usual briskness dulled. "I do hope this situation hasn't frightened you all off," she said, attempting a tight smile. "These things, tragic as they are, mustn't cast shadows on hospitality." Stroud arched an eyebrow. "Poison in the tea service does tend to take the charm off the countryside." Cynthia Bell flinched. Mrs. Whitlow paled but held her ground. "The police will find answers soon enough." Miss Marple gave a polite nod. "Yes, though some answers are already quite visible if one looks with the right kind of eyes." The room fell quiet again. Later that morning, Miss Marple requested to see the inn's guest ledger, citing her fondness for handwriting styles. Mrs. Whitlow hesitated, but the request came cloaked in such gentle disinterest that resistance felt unreasonable. "Just here in the office," Mrs. Whitlow said, unlocking the heavy oak door that led to a cramped room smelling faintly of lavender polish and old ink. The ledger was a large leather-bound volume, well kept, though newer pages had clearly been pasted over earlier entries. "New owners wanted a fresh start," Mrs. Whitlow explained. "Had to replace a lot when we reopened." Miss Marple flipped through the most recent pages with a soft hum, each name neatly entered, with dates and destinations. She paused briefly on Vanessa Harcourt. No listed address, only London. "Did Mrs. Harcourt pay any bills?" "She did," said Mrs. Whitlow, crossing her arms. 3 nights, but she barely stayed one." Miss Marple tapped the entry lightly. "Curious that she didn't list her address. Most people do, out of habit." She said she moved frequently. "A widow, I think, though she wore no black." "No," Miss Marple murmured. "She wore diamonds instead, a different kind of mourning." Her fingers hovered over an older pasted page at the back, partially torn. Something had been removed carefully, yet not cleanly. The edge showed a faint ghost of handwriting. Names, one nearly legible. "Lavinia," Miss Marple whispered. Mrs. Whitlow frowned. "Pardon?" "Nothing, dear. Just a passing memory." Outside, the rain had faded into a damp mist. Miss Marple walked the perimeter of the garden path once again, umbrella tucked under her arm. The well stood silent, As she approached, she noticed a thin set of footprints in the soft mud nearby. Smaller than most, deeper at the heel. Someone had walked there recently, despite warnings. She turned at the sound of hurried footsteps. Miss Bell was approaching, holding a folded note. Miss Marple, I don't know who else to trust. Miss Marple offered a kind smile. Start with the beginning, dear. Cynthia pressed the note into her hand. I found this slipped under my door this morning. I don't recognize the handwriting. Miss Marple opened the paper slowly. You don't know what she did. She came back to stir it all up again. Leave now, before it's too late. No signature. Miss Marple read it twice. You showed this to no one else. Number I wasn't sure if it was a joke, but after what happened to Mrs. Harcourt, has anyone mentioned the name Lavinia to you? Miss Bell blinked. Number should they? Perhaps. Or perhaps someone hoped they wouldn't have to. That afternoon, Miss Marple sat quietly in the reading
Waiting
room,
for shit to dry.
turning over the facts like knitting loops in her mind. Vanessa Harcourt had come not for pleasure, but with purpose. She had visited the inn before, during wartime. She'd hinted at ghosts, not spiritual ones, but those of the past. Someone here feared what she remembered. And now she was dead. The note to Miss Bell suggested panic, but not from guilt, rather from exposure. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the reappearance of Mr. Stroud, who entered carrying a small suitcase and a determined look. You're leaving? She asked. Business calls. And frankly, this
don't have any
village
more
isn't
jokes.
as charming as advertised. Quite understandable, though I imagine it's difficult to leave a game unfinished. He paused. Pardon? You were playing chess with Reverend Ely last night. At least, I assumed from the bishop in your coat pocket. Stroud's expression didn't flicker, but his hand moved reflexively. I collect carved pieces. Nothing unusual about that. No, Miss Marple agreed. Nothing at all. He left a moment later, suitcase in hand. Miss Marple stood, crossed the room to the window, and watched him walk down the drive. She noted he avoided the front path, cutting behind the rose trellis instead. Not a man keen on being seen. In the evening, Reverend Ely approached Miss Marple by the fire. You asked about Lavinia, he said. I did a little thinking. She looked up, interest awakening in her eyes. There was a Lavinia Clark, I believe. Worked here during the war, died young. Some said suicide. Others whispered she fell down the well. Was there an inquest? Barely. Wartime deaths were often buried quickly. No pun intended. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. And the guest register, was her name removed? Ely nodded. The original owners were discreet people. When the inn closed after the war, her death was treated as an unfortunate accident. But perhaps, Miss Marple murmured, not all accidents are equal. That night, Miss Marple remained in her room longer than usual, writing a letter she would never post. It was her way of thinking aloud, to commit her questions to paper and see which answers rose up. So far, she had. A woman dead by poison, a missing name in the records, an old tragedy involving a maid and a well, and someone desperate to keep all of it quiet.
Your carefree, hair-free summer starts now with the Veet Professional lineup of creams and waxes. Get fast and effective salon-smooth results right at home. It's carefree confidence you can carry all summer with Veet Professional.
Stay sharp with Allegra during the shower. Allergies, traffic, what's next? Drowsiness?
No way, we had Allegra. Woohoo! Yeah, Allegra is fast, non-drowsy allergy symptom relief that does not slow you down.
Oh, come on, just stay down.
It's a no-brainer.
She folded the page neatly and slipped it into her knitting basket. Something unseen had returned
God,
to
it's huge.
Netherledge. And Miss Marple intended to see it clearly before it vanished again. Chapter 4. A sharp wind chased away the last of the mist by morning, ruffling the ivy along the Holiday Inn's brick facade. Sunlight struck the garden wall, but it did little to warm the mood inside. An air of waiting hung thick through the inn, like an audience holding its breath before the curtain lifted on a final act no one quite understood. Miss Marple sat alone at breakfast. The room, once full, had dwindled to only 3 occupants. Reverend Ely, quietly reading over notes beside
There
a
we
bowl
go.
of
He's
oats.
done.
Miss Cynthia Bell, fidgeting with a jam spoon but not eating. And Colonel Fielding, who entered with more stiffness than usual and nodded a tight good morning to no one in particular. "I see Mr. Stroud has departed," Miss Marple remarked casually. Cynthia nodded. "Yes, packed early, didn't even stay for breakfast. Perhaps he dislikes unresolved endings," Miss Marple said softly. "Or perhaps he was worried someone might start asking what he was really doing here." Colonel Fielding straightened in his chair. "You believe that young man had something to do with the poisoning?" "I believe," Miss Marple replied gently, "that he came here with a purpose that had nothing to do with relaxation. I also believe Mrs. Harcourt knew it. She barely spoke to him." "Ah," Miss Marple smiled, "but people rarely need to speak to convey recognition. A glance is often quite enough." By mid-morning, Miss Marple had requested access to the old cellar, a section of the inn that had been locked since renovations. She presented the request to Mrs. Whitlow in her usual polite tone, citing an interest in the building's architecture. Mrs. Whitlow hesitated. "It's not part of the guest area, Miss Marple. Just a dusty old root cellar and some boarded-over pantry space." "All the more reason it holds stories," Miss Marple said pleasantly. Eventually, the key was fetched, and Miss Marple, accompanied by Cousin Lambert and a lantern, descended the narrow steps behind the kitchen. The cellar smelled of earth and damp timber. Old stone foundations jutted out from behind newer plaster. One side had clearly been reinforced, with brickwork far newer than the surrounding walls. Miss Marple ran her fingers along a wooden
Got it.
"There was a door here once." "Goodness," Cousin Lambert whispered. "You sound quite certain." "Note the difference in colour," she said. "And this edge. See how the bricks don't quite align? This was sealed deliberately." He knelt, adjusting the lantern, and squinted at the dust near the floorboards. "A faint impression, thin lines, almost a scrawl. Initials," she murmured. "LC, carved by someone hoping not to be forgotten." That afternoon, Miss Marple took tea with Reverend Ely, requesting his help with something of a biological nature. "Do you recall the story of the Good Samaritan?" she asked after a few opening niceties. "Of course," he replied, folding his hands. "A lesson in mercy." "You recall," she continued, "whether the man who passed by first, the priest, noticed the wounded man at all? Did he simply choose not to see?" He blinked. "I suppose he saw involvement." Miss Marple, "An important distinction. There are those who look away out of cowardice, and those who look away out of convenience." His posture stiffened slightly. "Miss Marple, are you suggesting I've overlooked something? I will be blind." She smiled. "Not at all, Reverend. I'm suggesting that you've remembered more than you think, especially from the past, from wartime, perhaps even from when Lavinia Clark died." A pause. Ely looked away. "I was young," he said finally, "still training in Bath, but I knew the story. Everyone did.
Oh,
Which
there we go.
story? Was caught in a scandal. A romance with an officer. There were whispers of pregnancy. Then she vanished. They said she drowned by accident. Others hinted at suicide. And some said he stopped. Yes, she knew something she shouldn't. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat beside her small writing desk, puzzling through the web. The victim, Vanessa Harcourt, had returned to this village after decades. She'd stayed here before. She'd asked questions. She'd made someone nervous. Lavinia Clark had also vanished in this very building, and her name had been scrubbed from the inn's records. Buried. Perhaps because Vanessa had intended to bring it to light. There had been talk of an officer involved in Lavinia's fall from grace. Someone with enough standing to shut doors quietly. Miss Marple's pen paused. Colonel Ambrose Fielding, retired. Older than he claimed, perhaps. Polished, private, and notably uncomfortable since the murder. That evening, Miss Marple asked to speak to the Colonel privately. He received her in the library, posture straight, eyes wary. "Colonel," she said kindly, "I believe you once knew a young maid named Lavinia Clark." He didn't blink. "Why do you ask?" "Because I believe Mrs. Harcourt came here to reveal something about her death. And I believe you hoped no one would remember her name." Fielding exhaled sharply through his nose. "Rubbish. She died under strange circumstances. You were stationed nearby. She worked here. And from what I gather, she may have been expecting a child." His jaw tightened. Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. And if Vanessa Harcourt had known the truth, perhaps from personal involvement or guilt over standing by, it might have threatened to undo a carefully preserved silence. Fielding leaned forward, his voice low. "I had nothing to do with her death." "No?" she asked. "But you were here, weren't you? The night she died?" A pause, then very softly, "Yes." "And did you silence Mrs. Harcourt to protect yourself?" "No," he said coldly. "I didn't even speak to her, but someone else might have." That night, long after the lamps had dimmed, Miss Marple stood by her window, watching the wind rustle the trees near the old well. She could feel the story assembling, its shape dark, its edges sharp. Lavinia had died carrying a secret. Vanessa had returned to uncover it. And someone among them was desperate to stop that truth from surfacing. But Miss Marple had seen enough. It was no longer a question of whether a crime had been committed, only of who feared the light most.
Own a design studio. Get a really cool design contract.
Chapter 5. The next morning broke with crisp air and long golden light that filtered through the fog-thinned trees. Miss Marple rose early, dressed with quiet precision, and made her way down to the breakfast room. Only Miss Cynthia Bell was present, hunched over a bowl of porridge that had already begun to cool. Miss Marple greeted her warmly and accepted a cup of tea from the silent maid. She noted the girl's eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured. "Rough morning?" Miss Marple asked gently. Cynthia gave a strange smile. "Didn't sleep. I kept hearing things above me. No one was up. It felt like someone walking the halls." Miss Marple stirred her tea slowly. "You're in room 3, aren't you?" Cynthia nodded. "Why?" "That used to be part of the original servant quarters, back before the refurbishment. I believe it connects through a false panel. to the attic corridor. One doesn't hear ordinary footsteps from above. Not unless someone meant to be heard. Cynthia's spoon paused in mid-air. Do you think someone's trying to frighten me? Miss Marple's voice remained light. I think someone very much wants to direct attention away from themselves. And a frightened young woman makes an excellent distraction. At midday, the coroner's preliminary report arrived. Miss Marple managed to glimpse part of it in the constable's hand before he tucked it into his folder. One phrase was clear. Acute digitalis poisoning consistent with deliberate administration via oral ingestion, likely liquid. The constable interviewed the remaining guests again. Colonel Fielding was brisk and dismissive. Cynthia apologetic and nervous. Reverend Ely calm as always. Yet, something new had settled into the Reverend's expression. A quiet tension just behind the eyes. When the constable questioned Miss Marple, she offered her usual gentle insights, peppered with pointed curiosity. Did Mrs. Harcourt write anything before her death? She asked casually. The constable blinked. Not that we found. No letter. Not even a note to herself. Why do you ask? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Only that she seemed like the sort to record her thoughts before doing something brave or foolish. And if she was here to confront the past, I doubt she came unarmed. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple knocked on the door of room 5, Vanessa Harcourt's former room. Mrs. Whitlow had cleared it out, but Miss Marple requested a moment to look through the belongings before they were sent back to the family solicitor. Inside, the air was stale and faintly sweet with the scent of fading perfume. A velvet scarf remained tossed over the chair. The bed was neatly made. The windows were latched. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the furniture, not for what was there, but for what had been moved. On the dressing table sat a small, ornate picture frame, the photograph removed. She picked it up carefully. The back was slightly ajar. Inside, she found a scrap of paper folded twice and wedged tightly beneath the cardboard. LC, I didn't forget. I saw what they did. It was never an accident. V. Miss Marple's lips thinned. So, it was confirmation. Vanessa Harcourt had returned with intention.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Had known she
I answer in French as if I actually know French to speak a full sentence.
nearly
Hi.
collided with Reverend Ely in the hallway. Miss Marple, he said, startled. I was just stretching my legs. Her eyes flicked to his coat pocket, where something small and rectangular bulged. A book? She asked mildly. He hesitated, then withdrew it. A slim volume of poetry, leather-bound. An old habit, he said, a little sheepishly. Reading calms me. A wise habit. Though I wonder if it was poetry Mrs. Harcourt had in mind when she placed her thoughts behind glass. Ely looked at her sharply. You found something. Miss Marple said nothing, only studied his expression. You're not with the police, he said, number. But sometimes they miss the important questions. Not from negligence, but from the assumption that guilt always makes noise. And you believe it doesn't. Oh no, Miss Marple smiled. Sometimes guilt is very quiet, especially when it's carried for a long, long time. That evening, the guests convened for dinner, though conversation was scarce. The long dining table, meant for a dozen, now felt like an echo chamber for the few remaining voices. Colonel Fielding spoke only to request the salt. Cynthia Bell seemed on the verge of tears throughout the meal. Reverend Ely ate methodically but did not touch his wine. Miss Marple, seated quietly, observed the way Mrs. Whitlow paused every time she passed behind the Colonel's chair. Not fear, familiarity. After pudding was served, Miss Marple broke the silence. Did anyone know, she said, as if idly, that Vanessa Harcourt had written a letter before her death? Everyone looked up. Reverend Ely froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. Colonel Fielding raised a brow. A letter? Miss Marple nodded. Yes, of sorts. More a note. Folded and hidden, of course. People often do that when they're unsure who to trust. Reverend Ely set his spoon down. And what did it say? Miss Marple's eyes remained serene. It said the death of Lavinia Clark was never an accident, that someone had seen what really happened and never forgot. A strained silence followed. Mrs. Whitlow cleared the plates too quickly. Cynthia rose and left the room. The Reverend remained seated. He seemed pale. Miss Marple returned to her room later that evening with a mind full of patterns, faint lines becoming sharper. Vanessa's hidden note confirmed what she had already suspected. Lavinia Clark had been silenced, and the silence had been preserved for decades. But by whom? Colonel Fielding had motive and proximity, but his reactions suggested pride, not fear. He had lied, perhaps, but about indiscretions, not murder. Cynthia Bell was too young. Yet her connection to the note under her door still puzzled Miss Marple. And Reverend Ely, he was the only one who had not reacted when the name Lavinia first surfaced, because he already knew it. He hadn't needed to remember it. He'd never forgotten. That night, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and wrote 3 names on a slip of paper. Lavinia Clark, Vanessa Harcourt, Martin Ely. She underlined the final one. Then, gently, she drew a 4th line beneath them all. Whatever had happened all those years ago was coming to light. And someone in this house was running out of shadows.
Fall is on sale at Michael's. Shop BOGOs on trending decor, lighting, floral, and more. Set your table with classic fall vibes and give your porch a cozy refresh for less. Shop in store and online today.
Chapter 6. Morning dawned dull and windless. The trees stood motionless outside the inn's long windows, as though they too were waiting for something to break the silence. In the breakfast room, Miss Marple found the chairs shuffled. Cynthia Bell's seat had been pushed farther from the hearth than usual. Only Reverend Ely and Mrs. Whitlow were present, exchanging polite, brittle words about weather and deliveries. Colonel Fielding had apparently taken his breakfast in his room. Miss Marple noted how Cynthia was absent yet again. She's still not come down? She asked mildly, stirring her tea. Mrs. Whitlow shook her head. Didn't answer when I knocked earlier, but I heard movement. She's up. Miss Marple's voice was soft. She's frightened. Reverend Ely looked up from his toast. Of what exactly? Miss Marple gave him a long, unreadable glance. Of the past? It tends to have long fingers in places like this. Later that morning, Miss Marple found Cynthia Bell walking slowly through the back garden, her scarf pulled tight despite the calm weather. The young woman flinched slightly at Miss Marple's approach. Miss Bell, she said gently, would you care to take a short walk? There's something I'd like to ask you. Away from watching eyes. Cynthia hesitated, then nodded. Yes, please. They walked the edge of the lawn toward the well. The grass soft underfoot. Dew still clung to the ivy curling up the stone wall. I've been thinking, Miss Marple began, about the note you received. The one slipped under your door. Cynthia stiffened. I didn't show anyone else. Number, but I believe it wasn't meant to warn you, Miss Bell. It was meant to test you. Cynthia stopped walking. What? Someone sent that note to see how you'd react, whether you'd speak, whether you'd flee, but more importantly, whether you were involved. I wasn't, Cynthia said quickly, her voice catching. I didn't even know Mrs. Harcourt before this week. Number, but I believe you may have known Lavinia Clark. A long silence. Cynthia's hands twisted in her scarf. I didn't know her. Not exactly. She was my aunt. Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. My mother never spoke of her, Cynthia continued, voice low. Just said she died during the war, serving in shame. I only learned her name properly after I saw the guest book here. I booked this place because I wanted to understand. I didn't know Mrs. Harcourt would be here. And when she was, Miss Marple asked gently, I thought maybe she knew something, but I never approached her. I was afraid. I didn't know who to trust. You still don't, Miss Marple said softly, but you've taken a step. Miss Marple returned to the inn and found Colonel Fielding in the lounge, absently playing with an unlit pipe. You look disturbed, Colonel, she said, as she sat beside him. I'm not a coward, Miss Marple, he said after a long pause, but I don't like ghosts, and I don't mean the rattling kind. You mean memories, she replied. He gave a quick nod. I was here the night Lavinia Clark died. She came to me, distraught, accused another man, an officer she trusted, of betrayal. Said she was with child and frightened. I told her I'd help. But you didn't, Miss Marple asked, though her tone held no accusation. No, he said slowly, because before I could act, she was gone. They said suicide. I suspected otherwise, but I kept quiet. Wartime secrecy. One learned not to question too loudly. And the officer, Miss Marple asked. Fielding met her gaze, voice quiet. Martin Ely. He was still in uniform then, not a Reverend yet. Miss Marple found Reverend Ely in the reading room later, seated by the fire with a book open on his lap, but clearly unread.
Detailed. No advice for you to make you accurate.
Seat opposite. He didn't look up. You've already asked it, Miss Marple. In every glance and half sentence since Mrs. Harcourt died. Miss Marple waited. Ely closed the book. Yes, Lavinia Clark knew me, trusted me. I was unworthy of that trust.
That's true.
His voice was thin now, stripped of its usual calm. She believed I loved her. I let her believe it. I was afraid of scandal, of exposure. I denied her when she needed me most. Then she disappeared. Miss Marple said nothing, letting the silence speak its weight. I believed the story they told, he continued, that she jumped. But years later, I learned otherwise. I learned she was pushed, and that someone, perhaps from the old staff, has seen it happen. A maid, I think, she vanished too. And Vanessa Harcourt? She came to me 2 years ago. Said she had letters from Lavinia, written days before she died. She believed someone here had silenced her. She was determined to find the truth.
I smell something weird.
I told her to forget it, for the sake of peace. But she didn't. No, Miss Marple said softly. She came back instead. That night, Miss Marple requested a fire be lit in the old lounge. The remaining guests gathered reluctantly, lured by the warmth more than the company. Miss Marple stood by the hearth, her knitting untouched in her lap. I believe, she began, that we have reached the edge of the mystery. The remaining steps are few, but steep. The room went still. Vanessa Harcourt died because she uncovered the truth about a woman long forgotten. Lavinia Clark's death was not suicide. She was murdered And someone has kept that secret buried all these years. Mrs. Whitlow trembled and said nothing. Miss Marple turned slightly. But secrets are like dust. They always return to the surface. She looked at Reverend Ely, whose eyes were cast down. You didn't kill her, but your silence made it possible. Then she turned to Mrs. Whitlow, whose eyes had widened with each word. And you, Mrs. Whitlow, were the maid who witnessed Lavinia's fall. You saw who pushed her. Gasps echoed through the room. No, Whitlow whispered. I didn't see, not clearly. But enough, Miss Marple said. Enough to keep quiet, to scrub the ledger, to watch Lavinia's name vanish. And Mrs. Harcourt? Colonel Fielding asked. Miss Marple's voice was quiet. Mrs. Harcourt came to ask the same questions I've just asked. She approached the wrong person, someone desperate to keep Lavinia buried. She drank tea prepared by Mrs. Whitlow. Whitlow shook her head violently. No, I didn't poison her. I swear it. I set the tray, but I didn't know. Miss Marple studied her. Then someone else interfered.
Expect bold and smooth. Expect rich and sweet. 2 taste experiences in one. Discover new
chocolate.
Salon's fusion. Expect delicious.
Oh my god, I hate commercials. Ugh.
Weird. A long silence. And then Cynthia Bell stood up. No, she said, you're all wrong. Everyone turned. I saw the tray outside her door, Cynthia said, voice trembling. It was left for just a moment, and I brought a little bottle of herbal tonic for myself. I'd left it in the lounge. I thought it might help calm her nerves. Miss Marple stood slowly. You added it? Cynthia nodded, shaking. Just a few drops. It wasn't poison. It was valerian and foxglove. Something my mother used. I didn't know the dose could kill. She crumpled into the armchair, sobbing. I just wanted to help her sleep. Miss Marple moved gently to her side. Intent is important, but consequences cannot be ignored. The room remained still. Shadows dancing on the walls as the fire crackled. Outside, wind stirred the garden again. The old well, long silent, sat watching. Inside, the truth had begun its quiet echo. And Miss Marple, as always, had simply listened. Chapter 7. The fire in the lounge had long since burnt low, but no one moved. Cynthia Bell sat hunched forward, her face buried in her hands. The room held its breath. Miss Marple remained standing, the flickering shadows softening the lines of her face. She had not accused Cynthia of murder, had not needed to. The young woman's confession had been one of grief, not malice. And yet, Vanessa Harcourt was dead. It was Reverend Ely who broke the silence. We must tell the authorities. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, but let's be clear about what we are telling them. She turned gently to Cynthia. My dear, the substance you gave her, was it truly your mother's remedy? Cynthia nodded slowly. Yes, a blend from an old recipe. She made it herself. I only ever used a few drops. It never hurt anyone. Where is the bottle now? In my room, still in my bag. Miss Marple looked to Colonel Fielding. Would you mind fetching it? Best not to let it disappear. The Colonel, still visibly troubled, gave a short nod and left the room. Reverend Ely sat heavily. If it was her tincture, and she dosed it too strongly, then the tragedy was accidental. Miss Marple's eyes remained steady. And yet I still don't believe Mrs. Harcourt's death was an accident. Cynthia looked up sharply. But what do you mean? Miss Marple folded her hands.
What time is it?
Placed the tonic on the tea tray,
Yeah.
yes, but only briefly, before it was brought upstairs. It's possible someone else tampered with the tea after that. Reverend Ely frowned. But who would have had access? The same person, Miss Marple said softly, who removed Vanessa Harcourt's letters. Later that night, while most of the house settled into a tense, fitful sleep, Miss Marple requested a word with Mrs. Whitlow in the office. The innkeeper looked more warm than ever, her once impeccable curls now dulled by stress. "I didn't poison anyone," she repeated. "You must believe that." Miss Marple gave her a kind look. "I believe you, Mrs. Whitlow, but I also believe you've kept quiet about something important." Mrs. Whitlow swallowed. "I was young, Miss Marple, when Lavinia died. I just started working here. She was lovely, kind, but she was troubled. And the night she died, there were raised voices. Her door was open. I saw a man leave. Not Colonel Fielding, another man. Did you recognize him?" Mrs. Whitlow hesitated. "Only later, at the funeral. He stood apart, didn't speak to anyone." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Did that man come back later, as a guest?" Mrs. Whitlow didn't speak, but her eyes answered. The next morning, with the constable summoned and the house beginning to stir, Miss Marple requested one last thing: to examine Vanessa Harcourt's luggage. It had been moved to a locked closet. Mrs. Whitlow reluctantly agreed. Inside the trunk, carefully folded garments and a zipped portfolio sat undisturbed. Miss Marple opened the flap and drew out a bundle of 8 letters. The paper was faded, the corners worn. She read only one line aloud. "M, you must answer. You said we would fix it. Now they want me to disappear, I'm afraid." The signature at the bottom was clear. Lavinia C. Miss Marple looked up at Mrs. Whitlow. She kept them hidden, even in death. She knew they were dangerous. And someone else did too, Mrs. Whitlow whispered. At noon, Miss Marple gathered the remaining guests once more. Reverend Ely, Colonel Fielding, Cynthia Bell, and Mrs. Whitlow. The constable arrived shortly after, having received Miss Marple's quiet request to delay his official statement-taking until she had spoken. "I believe," she said to the room, "that we are no longer dealing with a single act of poison. We are facing a crime decades in the making." She placed the letters on the table. These were written by Lavinia Clark to a man she trusted, a man who promised to protect her, a man who abandoned her instead. Reverend Ely closed his eyes. She was silenced because she was an embarrassment, a woman of low rank carrying a scandal. And someone, a man who later became respectable, helped hide that truth. Ulay opened his eyes. "I destroyed one letter years ago, when she first wrote me." Miss Marple nodded. "And Mrs. Harcourt knew that. She found more. She planned to expose you. She said so in her note. And someone, knowing that, panicked." She turned slowly. "But not Reverend Ely. No, he's guilty of cowardice and betrayal, but not murder." She looked to Colonel Fielding. "You found the bottle in Cynthia's bag and realized the death could be blamed on her. But you didn't bring the bottle to me last night. You poured its contents out and replaced it with something else. Pure digitalis." Fielding stood, face darkening. "That's a lie." Miss Marple's voice remained calm. "The bottle was tested this morning by the constable's chemist. The tincture inside no longer contains valerian or diluted herbs. Just foxglove. Too strong to be accidental." Fielding turned towards the constable. "You can't prove. We don't need to. Miss Marple interrupted, because your fingerprints are on the cork. A long silence followed. Then the Colonel laughed bitterly. She was going to destroy everything, drag it all out after all these years. I didn't kill Lavinia, but I helped silence the scandal. And Vanessa wouldn't let it rest. He sank into his chair. She said she was going to publish the letters, bring names into the papers. What good would that have done? Miss Marple answered softly. The truth doesn't care for convenience, Colonel.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
So, like, Outbound is like a place where people tend to stop off before they go off.
That evening, as the constable escorted Colonel Fielding away and the guests began packing to leave, Cynthia Bell sat quietly with Miss Marple on the terrace. I thought I'd killed her, Cynthia whispered, that I'd done something unforgivable. Miss Marple patted her hand. Your guilt came from compassion, not malice, but the difference is critical.
Okay.
What will happen to Reverend Ely?
See
He'll
what it is
live
now?
with what he did. And that, I suspect, is punishment enough.
Doubtful.
Cynthia looked toward the garden, where the sun had begun to set behind the trees. Do you think Lavinia ever forgave them? Miss Marple didn't answer for a moment. Perhaps, she said at last, but forgiveness must be earned. And the truth, my dear, is the first step. Chapter 8. The day after Colonel Fielding's arrest broke with an odd stillness. Not the usual peace of the countryside, but the kind of hush that lingers in the wake of something shattering. Rain fell in light, directionless mist over Netherlinch, softening the outlines of the inn and painting the garden in subtle greys and greens. Miss Marple rose early, as always. Her routine unchanged, though her mind was not. She had spent the night writing a quiet letter to her niece in London, describing the unfortunate events of her visit without once mentioning murder. She had found, over the years, that truth was best preserved when delivered gently. Downstairs, the dining room was nearly empty. Cynthia Bell sat alone, staring at a slice of toast she had no intention of eating. Reverend Ely was absent. Mrs. Whitlow moved through the room like a woman drifting underwater, silent, ghost-like, pouring tea with a distant air. Miss Marple joined Cynthia and spoke first. The rain's come in, I see. Cynthia blinked, startled. Yes, I think it's trying to wash the place clean. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Rain never quite washes everything. Some stains require scrubbing. Cynthia's eyes lowered. I still don't understand how it happened. I mean, Colonel Fielding, he always seemed so proper. They usually do, Miss Marple said gently. But the most dangerous secrets are rarely kept by villains. They're kept by men who think they're doing the right thing, or that they have no other choice. Cynthia whispered, he could have let it go. Just let her speak. Miss Marple looked into her tea. But then he would have had to live in a world where he wasn't in control of the truth. Some men cannot bear that. Mid-morning brought a surprise. Reverend Ely requested an audience with Miss Marple. They met in the same lounge where the letters had been revealed. He stood near the hearth, arms clasped behind his back, face hollow but resolute. I've made a decision, he said. I'm resigning my position at the parish. Miss Marple folded her hands in her lap. I see. I've written a full account for the bishop. The entire truth, my cowardice, the destroyed letter, my silence. I doubt I'll be allowed to serve again. Miss Marple regarded him steadily.
Waiting for stuff to dry.
You've chosen honesty now. That matters. He laughed once, quietly. Too little, too late. Perhaps. But the dead are not the only ones who suffer when truth is buried. It poisons the living too. He nodded, but did not speak. After a pause, Miss Marple asked, "Why didn't you stop Colonel Fielding?" When you realized what he'd done, Eli looked at her bleakly. "Because I still wanted the past to disappear. I knew he'd tampered with the bottle. I suspected it the moment Cynthia said he had gone to retrieve it alone. But I told myself it was an accident. I lied to myself to delay the inevitable." Miss Marple said nothing. She simply let the silence expand between them until he turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of ashes and resignation. Later that day, Miss Marple returned to the old cellar, alone this time. She moved slowly past the dusty shelves and forgotten crates until she came to the brick wall she had noted before. The faint mark, LC, still etched near the base. She ran a finger over it. "You weren't forgotten," she murmured. "Not really. You just had to wait for someone who noticed the quiet things." She closed her eyes for a moment. The chill in the cellar was real, but it wasn't what made her shiver. Some memories weren't hers, yet they settled on her shoulders as if they had always belonged. By evening, most of the guests had left. A police car had come and gone. The inn had returned to its original silence, but a different kind now. A hush born of consequence, not secrecy. Miss Marple sat in the garden, a shawl draped over her shoulders, watching the light fade behind the hills. Cynthia Bell joined her after a while, offering 2 cups of tea, one strong, one weak, without needing to ask which Miss Marple preferred. "I've decided I'm going to stay," Cynthia said quietly, "at least for a little while. Help Mrs. Whitlow run the place. She'll need someone." Miss Marple smiled. "A good decision, though you'll find it takes a while to grow used to stillness after so much noise." Cynthia nodded. "There's still so much I don't know about my aunt, Lavinia. It's strange. My whole life, she was just a family secret. And now, she's a real person," Miss Marple finished. "Yes, and I want to understand her." "Then you'll need to be patient and willing to listen to the silences." They drank in peace for a few minutes. Then Cynthia asked, "Do you ever feel tired of it, Miss Marple? Of seeing the darkness in people?" Miss Marple turned her face toward the horizon. "I do, but I also see something else." "What's that?" "Redemption, regret, the small acts of courage that follow great cowardice. And every so often, someone who chooses to do the right thing, even when no one is watching." That night before bed,
Just because we're not living doesn't mean you don't enjoy a good living room.
St. Michael's Halloween decor really knocks them undead.
Anyone with brains knows that.
She's real fit.
Those are bites.
Your carefree, hair-free summer starts now with the Veet professional lineup of creams and waxes. Fast and effective salon
before bed, Miss Marple folded her traveling coat, placed it neatly in her case, and laid her knitting basket on top. The pattern wasn't quite finished, but the shape was now clear enough. As she closed the case, she took one last look around the quiet room. The candle flickered low. Vanessa Harcourt had come searching for justice. Lavinia Clark had waited in silence far too long. Colonel Fielding had been brought down by his need to control the past. Reverend Ely had finally stepped into the light, too late to save others, but perhaps not too late to redeem himself. And Cynthia Bell, young, bruised by truth, but broken, had chosen to stay. Miss Marple turned down the lamp and climbed into
Is
bed.
it a point where I'm kind of overwhelmed? I don't know what I'm doing.
Shifted. The haunted Holiday Inn no longer whispered, it breathed. Chapter 9. The sun rose pale and thin over Netherlinch. The next morning, as though uncertain whether it ought to shine at all. Miss Marple stood at the window in her room, fully dressed, hands clasped behind her back. Below, the gravel path sparkled with dew, and a blackbird pecked curiously at the base of the sundial. She had not planned to stay another day, but something, perhaps instinct, perhaps the faint whisper of something unfinished, had urged her to delay her departure.
I might be done for the night.
And sure enough,
I'm
the
pretty
village
tired.
hadn't finished with her yet.
I had a few things started and finished.
Breakfast, Mrs. Whitlow approached, her usual stoicism a touch more frayed. Miss Marple,
Not really.
there's something I didn't mention earlier, something I found yesterday. I wasn't sure it meant anything. Miss Marple looked up with interest. Go on, dear. Mrs. Whitlow produced a small bundle wrapped in a handkerchief. Inside was an envelope, browned with age but still sealed. It was hidden in an old ledger drawer in the cellar, she said. I was sorting through accounts when it slipped loose. Addressed to E.M. No first name. It's Lavinia's handwriting. Miss Marple took the letter delicately. Why didn't you turn it in sooner? I wasn't sure it mattered now, after everything that's happened. Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave the envelope. Every buried thing matters, especially the ones meant to be found. She didn't open it then, not in the hallway. Instead, she took it to the reading room, sat beneath the lamp, and unfolded the past. The letter was short. To E.M., you said we could leave it behind, that we'd be safe. But I've seen his face now. He knows. I think he means to hurt me, or frighten me into silence. I've hidden the other letters, but if anything happens, it's because I didn't disappear quickly enough. Please, don't pretend you didn't see, not now. L. Miss Marple folded it once again, hands still for a long moment. E.M. Ely Martin. She hadn't known his full name before now, so Lavinia had trusted him to protect her, even as fear closed in. And he had failed her in life, and again in memory. And yet, the threat she described, the man who knew, the implied danger in his eyes. It had not been Ely. It had been Fielding. By midday, Cynthia Bell returned from the post office, where she had gone to collect her aunt's forwarded effects. She found Miss Marple seated on the terrace, sorting through her knitting as though nothing had ever disturbed the peace. There's a letter for you, Cynthia said, handing over an envelope, marked urgent. Miss Marple thanked her and opened it. Inside was a short note from the local inspector in Market Wexley, confirming that Fielding's fingerprints had indeed been found on both the cork and the rim of the altered tonic bottle. She read the line twice. No doubt. No accident. Still, one matter remained incomplete. She turned to Cynthia. Have the police located Vanessa Harcourt's hidden letters? The full bundle? Cynthia frowned. I assumed they were with the ones you found in her trunk. They were, but the letter Lavinia referred to, the one she feared being found, it wasn't in the set. Then, where is it? Miss Marple didn't answer. Not yet. That evening, Miss Marple asked Mrs. Whitlow for one more tour of the guest rooms, under the pretense of saying goodbye to the house. The older woman hesitated, but relented. Together they climbed the main staircase, past the shuttered room 5, and paused at the last door on the left, Vanessa Harcourt's. Miss Marple stopped there. Did she spend much time in here? She mostly kept to herself. Read in the evenings, drank tea. I didn't go in. May I? Mrs. Whitlow handed over the key. The room had not changed. The faint imprint of Vanessa's presence still lingered. Lavender water on the vanity, a closed book on the nightstand, a leather case under the bed. Miss Marple moved to the fireplace.
Yeah,
It hadn't been lit during her stay, but above it, a narrow panel of decorative molding caught her eye.
I think that'll work.
She reached for the edge and pressed gently. The wood gave
Oh, that's
slightly.
gonna end up in my guts.
A click.
Do that, dumbass.
The door popped open. Inside, folded and yellowed, lay one final letter, addressed to no one. She opened it carefully. If anything happens to me, it's because of what I know about Lavinia Clark. About the cover-up. About who pushed her. I have the proof now. They can't silence both of us. VH Miss Marple turned back to the door. I think we have all the voices now, she murmured. Later that night in the drawing room, lit only by the low fire, Miss Marple gathered the few who remained. Cynthia, Mrs. Whitlow, and at his own request, Reverend Ely. She placed the final letter on the table. This, she said gently, was the last piece. They read it in silence. Cynthia looked up first. So she knew he would try to stop her. Miss Marple nodded. She had reason to suspect. She knew Colonel Fielding would not tolerate the shame. She underestimated, perhaps, just how far he would go.
No frills. We're here to help you save money.
Oh, do you have enough PC Optimum points for all this?
Yes.
What's yours is mine.
Rewards worth committing to. It's the no-frills thing to do.
Reverend Ely leaned forward, rubbing his temples. She trusted me once, but I never earned it. You still can, Miss Marple said softly, by ensuring her truth is heard, not hidden. Before bed,
Did you
Miss
break
Marple
with
sat
that?
once more by the fire alone. She thought of Vanessa, persistent, brave, foolish, perhaps, but unrelenting in her pursuit of justice. She thought of Lavinia Clark, whose initials in the cellar were all that remained of her until now. And she thought of Cynthia, carrying the weight of family shame, transformed into something closer to grace. The mystery, it seemed, had untangled itself at last, not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet truth. And that, Miss Marple thought, was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 10. The following morning was overcast, though no longer heavy with dread. The inn, still quiet, had shifted subtly, no longer gripped by secrets, but cautiously breathing again, like an old house relieved of its burden.
What's wrong with your
Miss
tape?
Marple sat by the window in the front lounge with a simple breakfast tray. She buttered her toast without rush, her eyes drawn to the curved staircase at the far end of the hall. It was on those stairs, Mrs. Whitlow had said, that Lavinia had last been seen alive. Halfway down, her shawl sliding off one shoulder. That image returned to Miss Marple now, unbidden but potent, because secrets weren't the only things that echoed. Guilt did too. Just before noon, Inspector Graves from Mullins arrived to take Miss Marple's final statement. He was a broad-shouldered man with a surprisingly thoughtful manner. We've completed the lab results, he said, as he laid out papers on the sitting room table. Your suspicions were entirely correct. The liquid in the tonic bottle was pure digitalis extract, far too concentrated to be an accident. Miss Marple sipped her tea. And the fingerprint evidence? The cork bore Colonel Fielding's prints, no one else's. And it appears he did in fact pour out Cynthia Bell's original mixture and replace it. He paused, then added, Fielding's barrister is already preparing a diminished responsibility defense. Claims the pressure of war-era secrets unbalanced him. Miss Marple gave a small, wry smile. Perhaps, but people are rarely unbalanced before they're cornered. When the inspector had gone, Miss Marple wandered out to the garden, where she found Cynthia Bell on the bench near the well. The young woman was dressed in soft grey, her posture tired but less tense than days past. You look as though you've been thinking, Miss Marple said, sitting beside her. I have, Cynthia replied.
It's a little bigger, but there's no such thing as
Vanessa.
perfect.
I keep wondering what they would have done if the truth hadn't come out. Would Lavinia have ever found justice? Would Vanessa have lived? Miss Marple looked toward the old well. Truth always has its moment. Sometimes it comes too late for those who suffered most, but it comes. Cynthia turned to her. What about me? Do you think I can stay here? Really stay? And not just as the niece of a forgotten tragedy? You're not just her niece, Miss Marple said softly. You're the reason her story was told. Cynthia looked down at her hands. I didn't solve anything. No, Miss Marple agreed. But you didn't turn away either. That's rarer than you think. Later that day, Mrs. Whitlow approached Miss Marple as she was folding her shawl in the drawing room. I've made a decision, she said quietly. Oh, I'm retiring after the season ends. I've run this place for 21 years, kept the books, scrubbed the secrets, smiled through every kind of nonsense. Miss Marple studied her. And now, I want to go north. There's a cottage near my sister's. Chickens, a fence I can paint. No, cellars with initials carved in the beams. Miss Marple smiled. A fine decision. The heart, after all, deserves peace. Mrs. Whitlow hesitated, then asked, will you tell the world what really happened here? Miss Marple folded her hands. The world already knows. What it does with the truth is its own burden. That evening, Cynthia sat in the attic library, sorting through what little remained of her aunt's things. Miss Marple joined her and helped unfold a small silk handkerchief, inside which lay a locket. It bore 2 names etched inside, L.C. and D.M. Cynthia traced the letters in silence. She loved him. Yes, Miss Marple replied, and he failed her. Cynthia looked up. Do you think he meant to hurt her? No, Miss Marple said, but neglect when cloaked in silence can be as deadly as any blow. Sometimes cruelty isn't a matter of action, but omission. The girl closed the locket. Then I'll keep this, to remember her. Good, Miss Marple said, but don't wear it as a weight. The past doesn't belong on your shoulders. That night, as she prepared for bed, Miss Marple paused by her open suitcase. Her belongings were folded and packed. Her shawl, her gloves, her notebook of scribbled thoughts and dates. She slipped the final letter from Vanessa Harcourt into a small leather folio. The handwriting, delicate and steady, still felt fresh. In a way,
What did I do with your throat?
thought Vanessa had
Read
succeeded.
that again.
She had not survived, but she had not been silenced.
Damn
The
it.
crime was
Threw it on the ground,
exposed,
didn't I?
the murderer named, and Lavinia Clark remembered. Justice, in its quietest form, had been served. The final hour before sleep, Miss Marple wrote a short entry in her private notebook. The haunted places are not marked by blood or creaking doors, but by the things people refuse to speak aloud. And yet, all truth waits patiently, even if only one pair of eyes is left to notice. She closed the book,
Damn it.
set it beside her bed.
What did I just do with it? I ripped it
the light. Outside, the wind passed over the roof of the Holiday Inn, not with menace,
God
but
damn
with
it.
relief,
I think I'm done for the night.
as if the house
I want to get this guy done, but I don't think I'm going to get it. Cardboard would work.
The day of Miss Marple's departure arrived quietly.
Actually, cardboard's not a bad idea.
My Lindor bar. To enjoy, to dream, and to keep reading. Irresistibly smooth milk chocolate from the Lindor chocolatier. Melt into a lasting moment of bliss.
Own a design studio. Get a really cool design contract. Realize you have to do a whole bunch of mathy business work before you can even start the not mathy design work. Use QuickBooks to see the big picture. Use QuickBooks to manage cash flow. Add
There it
more
is.
cash to your flow. Let QuickBooks do more of this. You can do more of the things you love. Intuit QuickBooks. Manage and grow your business all in one place.
Quietly, with a silver dawn that painted the hedgerows in soft light. Birds chirped low in the distance, and the grass glistened with dew. There was no fanfare, just the rhythm of a house slowly returning to its ordinary breath. Downstairs, the hearth was cold but clean, and the scent of toasted bread drifted in from the kitchen.
And they love their toast.
Mrs. Whitlow had set out the tea herself, her motions quieter than usual. Miss Marple arrived with her gloves already buttoned and her bag packed. She poured herself one last cup, stirred it gently, and looked around the room where the truth had finally taken form. It felt smaller now. Not literally, but as if the walls no longer needed to stretch themselves around hidden stories. Cynthia Bell joined her at the table. Her usual timidity now layered with something else. Resolve, perhaps. "I thought you'd be gone before breakfast," she said. Miss Marple smiled. "One never leaves a house without saying a proper goodbye. It's bad manners and bad psychology." Cynthia tilted her head. Psychology? People forget that buildings remember things, but so do people. One should always give both a chance to part properly. She took a sip of tea, and it gives you time to ask your final question.
Okay, well, that didn't work.
Cynthia hesitated, then leaned in. "You never said whether you believed Lavinia was actually pushed." Miss Marple set down her cup. "She was. But who?" Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave hers. Fielding was involved in the cover-up, but the actual moment, her death, happened after a confrontation. Someone saw her speaking to another officer that night. Someone neither she nor Fielding named. The man disappeared shortly afterward. Cynthia's brow furrowed. "You mean we don't know who really did it?" "We may never know that name," Miss Marple said softly. But Vanessa knew enough to realize Lavinia hadn't died by her own hand. And she knew who covered it up. That's why she returned. So in the end, it wasn't justice. Not entirely. No, Miss Marple agreed. But it was something perhaps rarer. Accountability and remembrance. Cynthia looked toward the window. "I'm not sure that's enough." Miss Marple followed her gaze. "It isn't, but it's a beginning. And beginnings need caretakers." Later that morning, as Miss Marple waited for the hired car to arrive, she walked once more through the old corridors of the inn. Her steps took her past room 5, now unoccupied, its door slightly ajar. The bed had been stripped. The air inside smelled of lavender and disuse. She stepped inside. At the far end, the window overlooked the garden and the well beyond it. It was the only room with that view. Vanessa had chosen it on purpose. Miss Marple crossed to the desk, ran her gloved fingers across the wood. She imagined the woman sitting there with her letters, the window behind her, the truth rising up from the roots of the earth. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a single envelope, Vanessa's last letter, and slid it into the drawer, closing it gently. Let someone find it years from now. Let them know this house had been haunted once, and then healed. By noon, the car was packed. Mrs. Whitlow stood beside it, trying not to wring her hands. "I do hope you'll come back," she said. "I expect I shall. Though next time, perhaps just for jam and tea, not poison and ghosts." Mrs. Whitlow gave a strained chuckle. "You've left things in better order than I ever could have imagined." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "You did that yourself. You just needed someone to witness it." She turned to Cynthia. who stood near the garden path, her boots damp with grass. "I'll write," the girl said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If that's all right." "Of course," Miss Marple said, taking her hand. "And remember, silence is sometimes an armor, but more often it's a prison." Cynthia nodded. "I think I'm ready to speak." As the car pulled away from the inn, Miss Marple looked back only once. The tall hedges, the stone well, the attic windows, none of them held menace now. Only stories. And stories told truthfully were never dangerous. She settled into her seat, hands folded neatly in her lap. In her handbag were her notes. Not to share with the papers, of course, but to remind herself, should anyone ask years from now how it had happened. How a woman had returned to a place that buried her friend's truth. How another had borne the weight of a name she was never meant to know. And how a quiet house had whispered its last secret just loud enough for one sharp-eyed woman to hear. Chapter 12. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in St. Mary Mead, addressed to Miss Jane Marple, penned in a young, steady hand. The handwriting was unfamiliar but composed, with a precision that hinted at newfound clarity. Miss Marple, seated in her garden beneath the climbing roses, opened the envelope with a faint smile. "Dear Miss Marple, the inn is quieter now. Most weekends pass without more than a guest or two. Reverend Ely has left the village entirely, resigned, just as he said he would. I believe it was harder for him than he showed, but there's dignity in facing what one has avoided. Mrs. Whitlow has gone north to her sister's. Before she left, she gave me the cellar key. She said I was the only one who would know what to do with it. I burned the broken ledger pages. I buried Lavinia's carved initials beneath lavender. It felt symbolic and somehow right. The village barely speaks of what happened. There are nods in the grocer's queue and tighter smiles at the church, but no questions. Only the sense that something long overdue has ended. Thank you for seeing what no one else would or could. I don't think Vanessa Harcourt expected to be remembered kindly, but she will be. And Lavinia too. I've decided to stay on through the spring, perhaps longer. I've started keeping a small journal. I call it the Echo Book. It's for the things people almost say. Warmly, Cynthia Bell Miss Marple read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into a book of pressed flowers, between two pages of faded violets. The same afternoon brought another piece of correspondence. This one from Inspector Graves. It was brief, official, and final. Colonel Ambrose Fielding confessed in full during a second interview. He confirmed that he substituted the poison, believing Vanessa Harcourt's disclosures would ruin not only his reputation, but the legacy of his regiment. He admitted to intercepting Vanessa's intended mail from the village post, suspecting she had begun circulating her evidence. The few letters recovered from his luggage matched the handwriting of Lavinia Clark. The court has accepted his plea.
I think I put this on backwards.
But justice, as you rightly suggested, has found its course.
Yep, that's okay.
With respect, Inspector D. Graves, Miss Marple, folded this second letter with less ceremony and tucked it away.
No, it's fine the way it is.
Drawer. Her thoughts drifted not to Fielding, but to the names he had tried to erase. Vanessa Harcourt, Lavinia Clark. Both silenced in different ways, and yet both had found, through courage and consequence, a voice in the end. That evening, Miss Marple hosted her weekly supper with the
Thank you for the thumbs up.
And Miss Hartnell, who came bearing rhubarb tart and gossip
Mostly
from the
works.
next parish.
You want the thing's 100 years old.
You've been terribly quiet this evening, Jane, said Miss Hartnell between forkfuls. "I dare say you're still brooding on that inn you visited." "Oh, not brooding," Miss Marple replied, pouring more tea. "Merely reflecting. I've always found that the most important stories aren't those people tell, but those they never quite manage to keep buried." The vicar's wife smiled politely, unsure what to make of it. Miss Marple, of course, did not elaborate. After the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked, Miss Marple settled in her chair by the window. Outside, the breeze moved through the hedgerows, carrying the faint scent of chamomile and earth. Her eyes wandered to her writing desk. The book lay there, open to a final page. She picked up her pen. Case closed. The Haunted Holiday Inn. Crime, murder by poisoning, rooted in decades-old silence. Victim, Vanessa Harcourt, who came seeking justice for another real victim. Lavinia Clark, long buried in the silence of respectability perpetrator. Colonel Ambrose Fielding, murderer by motive, not impulse complicity.
There we go. What do you think?
Healy, cowardice cloaked in authority. Truth revealed by letters, omissions, gestures, silences. Resolution, justice by exposure, not punishment alone. Last confirmation.
You should be working better. I took all the weight off your head.
A village left changed. She paused, then added a final line.
I think some of the wiring's bent, but I don't know how.
But they do stop screaming. She closed the notebook and returned it to its shelf. Alongside other volumes, each spine neatly labelled, each mystery tied not in violence or spectacle, but in understanding. As the last light of day disappeared behind the low ridge of hills, Miss Marple took up her knitting. The house settled, the wind quieted, and the garden outside grew still. In Netherlinch, the Holiday Inn remained open. Its rooms no longer whispered, its windows no longer watched. Its truth had been seen. And that, Jane Marple thought, was the true end of any haunting.
With IXL, there's an endless number of skills that match exactly what my kids are working on in class right now. And with so many different kinds of questions. My kids never get bored.
The Twisted Christmas Garland Clue. Welcome to Mystery Crackers. I'm Michael, your host for tonight's Miss Marple Mystery. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Before we begin, I'd love to know what's something you've always been curious about. A small habit people have. A place you've never been. Or
Should have been gentler with you. I'm sorry.
with you for years. Share it with us in the comments. I truly enjoy reading your thoughts. Now then, settle in, and let's begin tonight's story.
Yeah.
Chapter 1.
You'll be a couple
Snow
of
had fallen thickly on St. Giles Hollow, coating the hedgerows and cottage roofs in a pristine frost that sparkled under the pale December sun. The villagers bustled with the usual holiday cheer. Postmen in mufflers, housewives comparing pudding recipes,
You guys are for the night.
children tugging sleds.
I don't have a few brain cells left for myself for the
Above it all loomed the gabled silhouette of Crowswood Hall, perched like a roosting hawk atop the hill.
Put that together.
Inside, logs crackled merrily in the drawing hearth. The towering Christmas tree stood near the French
Maybe.
windows,
Alright, that's enough.
lavishly decorated in silver tinsel and velvet ribbons.
I don't care.
But it was the...
I know. Alright, let's see what we got done technically tonight. Alright, we got this little jackalope. We got this tiny little skull bear. This little goat boy, who was so freaking cute. His head is a little heavy, but came out alright. You got your glaze, so you're done. You're 50% there, and you're done. Alright, thank you, good night, and I will see you tomorrow, probably.